Do you stand by your testimony that there is an active investigation, counterintelligence investigation, regarding Trump campaign individuals in the Russian government as to whether or not they collaborate? You said that in March. Is
to
that
see
still
if there
true?
was any coordination between the Russian effort and people.
Is that still going on?
Yes.
Okay, so nothing's changed. You stand by those two statements.
Correct.
Even before he was fired, he was one of the most politicized directors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in U.S. history. In the heat of the U.S. presidential election, just 11 days before the vote, FBI Director James Comey relaunched an investigation linked to Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. 3 months earlier, she had been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing after it came to light she may have had classified information on her private email account.
But I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
Even though he was widely seen to have benefited from the probe politically, President Donald Trump has explained his sacking of Comey by citing the Clinton investigation. Just last week, Trump publicly accused Comey of giving Clinton a free pass for many bad deeds, a reference to Comey not having recommended any criminal charges in her case. But others see Comey's dismissal as an attempt by Trump to stifle an investigation into his administration's links with Russia.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
For many people, Donald Trump playing fast and loose is a given. What isn't is whether he and those in his campaign are linked to any election tampering ordered by Moscow. During the campaign, WikiLeaks published emails stolen from Democratic officials. The U.S. intelligence community later concluded that Russian President Vladimir Putin had ordered the hacking, something many see as having undermined Hillary Clinton and helped Donald Trump. On Tuesday, the very day that Trump sacked Comey, federal prosecutors issued grand jury subpoenas. They demanded business records from people who worked with Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, when he was a private citizen. The investigation into Flynn was launched late last month.
And we have no evidence, zilch, that he obtained permission from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of State to accept any foreign government payments as required by law.
Flynn was fired as National Security Advisor after he failed to tell the truth about his contacts with the Russian ambassador to the United States. He's not the first person close to Trump accused of connections to Moscow.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
With so much on the table, it's little surprise James Comey had launched an investigation. But after his dismissal, many wonder whether the future of that inquiry is now in question.
This investigation must be run as far away as possible from this White House and as far away as possible from anyone that President Trump has appointed.
But some Republicans argue Comey's dismissal doesn't taint the investigation underway.
It will have absolutely no impact at all on the investigation that we on the Intelligence Committee are conducting.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook.
Some have compared the decision to the so-called Saturday Night Massacre of 1973, in which President Richard Nixon, who was being investigated at the time in the Watergate scandal, fired an independent special prosecutor. Donald Trump's dismissal of James Comey has sent shockwaves through Washington. Who will permanently replace him is not yet clear, nor are the consequences of what some people perceive to be a political game of Russian roulette. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined by Martin Reardon, a 21-year veteran of the FBI, who is now the vice president of the Sufan Group, which advises on security issues. And in Moscow is Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst at Sputnik International. We're also joined by Christopher Phelps, an American historian at the University of Nottingham in the UK. Thanks all of you for joining us. Martin Reardon, if I can start with you. Comey's termination. Does the president have a strong cause, or was Comey fired unfairly?
Well, I think the jury's still out on that one, but right now, from what we know, it appears to be unfairly. The stated public reason was dissatisfaction from the Department of Justice at this point on how Mr. Comey handled the email Clinton investigation. But coincidence or no coincidence, this is also right at a time when the Russian meddling of the 2016 campaign and possible ties to the Trump administration, when that investigation is really picking up steam. In fact, just yesterday, the FBI served a number of grand jury to National Security Council officials in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah, so we have, we're hearing that federal prosecutors had issued grand jury subpoenas, as was mentioned. We know that Attorney General Jeff Sessions wanted this. He advised Trump to do it, and he's the man who met with the Russian ambassador Kislyak and didn't disclose that he met with the Russian ambassador Kislyak. He had to recuse himself from the investigation. As Martin Reardon says, coincidence or no coincidence. What do you think, Dmitry Babich? Are these all coincidences, or maybe there's something there?
Well, I think there is just one thing there, that is the degradation of the American political system and of morals in general in the political class of the United States. I mean, this talk of the Russian involvement has been going on for, I think, 8 months now, maybe even 10 months. But we haven't seen a single photo, we haven't heard a single recording, we haven't seen a single name, and of course we haven't seen a single trial.
But exactly, that's why the president firing the guy who was looking for that evidence is suspicious, isn't it, Dmitry?
Well, I think what is suspicious is that the American press keeps talking about it and keeps making assertions which are not backed up by any evidence. Mr. Comey was accused by the Democrats of playing into the hands of Mr. Trump. Now Mr. Trump is for some reason angry with Mr. Comey. When they say that Comey is pro-Russian, then why did Comey just 2 days ago call Russia a danger to the world, or like the most dangerous country in the world? All of that can be summed up by one word: degradation. Degradation of the American political system, degradation of institutions. The whole electoral campaign last year was terrible. I mean, for the first time in US history, the acting president was openly supporting one of the candidates, while simply destroying the other one.
Let's ask Christopher Phelps. Sure. Okay, good point. Christopher Phelps. Sure. Okay, Christopher Phelps. Degradation, that's the Russian perspective. As a historian, do you agree?
Well, it's a complicated question. It's not a degradation on the scale of what's happening in Russia. But yes, I'd have to agree that there's a lot of disturbing developments in the U.S. political system. There is wiretapping evidence. That's why Michael Flynn was forced to step down. There is photographic evidence of Kislyak having meetings with people. Manafort was forced to step down. I mean, the idea that there's absolutely no evidence and there's no smoke, that's wrong. And James Comey, of course, was for a long time criticized by Democrats for intervening in the 2016 election. And what's interesting is that it looks like now the investigation that the FBI is doing into connections between the Trump campaign and the Putin regime were yielding something that made the Trump appointees like Jeff Sessions at the Department of Justice uncomfortable, and that this seems like a move that is not about the competence of James Comey, but rather is about the attempt of the Trump administration, the Trump White House, to obstruct justice in the case of an investigation into the campaign activities of last year.
Martin Reardon, has this damaged the agency?
Well, yes, in some respects. I mean, when the FBI has come under quite a bit of scrutiny for the last several months, some rightfully so, some not. But when you fire the head of an agency, it's certainly going to reflect on the rest of that agency. So it's a morale issue. And it's also, there's question now, and again, this is a very important phase of this investigation. They're without a director, they're without a head. They'll have an acting director, probably Andy McCabe, the current deputy director. But this does have an effect on the FBI, short term for this investigation, and potentially long term. Remember, Mr. Comey was fired after 3 years into a 10-year term, so potentially long-term repercussions if they don't get the right leader in there to take his place.
Yeah, and Martin, I've been looking at some possible replacements that have been named. Now, this, granted, some of the sources included Fox News. They were mentioning Rudy Giuliani, Chris Christie, Sheriff Clark. Are those names realistic at all?
Well, realistic in that if there are certainly the types of individuals or the individuals that the president may consider. Of the three, I would say Mr. Giuliani is probably the more qualified, but he's a very political and right now divisive figure. That's not quite the type of leadership that the FBI needs. In the past, federal judges have been brought in, and they've been very effective.
Dmitry, let me ask you, would it have been in Russia's interest to meddle in the election?
Well, I think every country has its own sympathies in other countries. And of course, Mrs. Clinton did not inspire much sympathy in Russia after she compared the Russian regime which exists here with Hitler's regime, after she made a lot of other hostile statements. I'm asking this question to the American media. Why the hell should we love her? Why do you accuse us of not sympathizing with her after all the statements that she made? That would be idiotic on Russia's part to help Mrs. Clinton or not to sympathize with Mr. Trump after all the statements that she made. But of course that doesn't mean that Russia had the resources and the desire to tilt the will of the American voters. I think the American voters supported Mr. Trump against the will of 95% of the American press, whose behavior during the campaign was shameful, because that press was openly biased. It was biased in favor of Clinton, and the voters punished the media for that. So that is the real truth, and instead of seeing the truth and trying to pull their act together, the American media is accusing Russia, trying to find a black cat in a dark room. It's very difficult to find that cat simply because that cat is not there.
Okay, Christopher Phelps, if we find out that the president squashed this investigation, fired the head of the FBI and then squashed this investigation because there was something there, might there be grounds for impeachment?
Oh, there could well be grounds for impeachment, yeah. This is why people are calling for a special prosecutor now, so that we depoliticize the law enforcement process. We have somebody who's independent of politics to look into it, who can't be fired, and who's looking at it impartially, and we take it off the table of the political arena. Your Russian guest keeps saying things that are simply not true. It's documented. It's not that John Podesta's email account suddenly was divulged to the U.S. media of his own volition. There was a massive hacking operation of the Democratic National Campaign, of top Clinton campaign officials, and it's pretty clearly linked to Russia. So what was happening here was an investigation that was going to determine whether or not there were any links between that operation and the Trump campaign. It's very, very hot potato stuff. And firing the director of the top law enforcement agency in the United States right in the middle of trying to clear it only muddies the waters and makes it look like there actually might be guilt on the part of the Trump campaign.
Dmitry, you want to respond to that?
Well, that's just funny when my American colleague is saying that Russia is guilty of the fact that John Podesta's emails were published without his volition. Well, no official, no person in the world would like to publish documents incriminating him of his or her own volition. That is the way the real investigative press operates. WikiLeaks published John Podesta's emails.
Excuse me, could you at least get it straight that I'm not American media?
I'm
not American media.
Yeah, Dmitry is not American media. Dmitry is a professor.
Right?
Britain. Fair enough. Okay, so Dmitry, finish your point.
Yeah, so
exactly.
Of course, Mr. Podesta didn't want his emails to be published. They were published by WikiLeaks. There is absolutely no evidence showing that Russia helped WikiLeaks to publish it. WikiLeaks is now criticizing Russia on many accounts. And Mr. Podesta had to acknowledge that these emails were genuine. They were not made up. So instead of investigating Mr. Podesta, as, for example, it was done during the Watergate scandal in the beginning of the 70s, the American media and the American special services are looking for the so-called foreign involvement. I'm sorry, that reminds me of the worst times of the Soviet Union, when instead of political reform, Mr. Stalin and others were looking for foreign agents making things
it reminds
bad.
Dmitry of the Soviet Union. Fascinating. Okay, Martin, 110 days in, just past that 100-day mark. So Trump has fired the acting attorney general, fired the national security advisor, and now the FBI director. Are you worried?
Well, I am. This is almost like the game show The Apprentice, where he's almost obligated or feels obligated with great public fanfare to say the words, "You are fired." It's very controversial with Mrs. Gates, with her firing General Flynn. I think that was the right decision. I think he was the wrong person to put in there to begin with. But again, with Director Comey, at a key point in this investigation, the one man in Washington who's working to make sure that everything is uncovered and brought to light, he's out of a job because he's getting a bit too close to the White House. That is something to be concerned about.
Christopher Phelps, final question. Is the appointment going to tell us everything we need to know about how we move forward?
It will be revealing. I have to say that for all my disagreements with the distortions of your Russian guest, that I, too, am worried about the rule of law in the United States. Is it that law enforcement is impartial? Is it that in a republic no one is above the law? That's the way it's meant to be. And we need somebody who has the law and the principles of the republic in mind rather than the doings and the subservience to the will of the current president in the Oval Office.
Okay, I'll let that be the final word because we are out of time. But Martin Reardon, Dmitry Babich, and Christopher Phelps, thanks so much. It's been good to talk to all of you.